The Chicago Blackhawks put an end to their losing skid while Jonathan Toews eyes an NHL return.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Do me a quick favor. Please go and hit that like button. Jump in the comment section down below as well with your reaction to the Blackhawks besting the Montreal Canadiens to snap their losing skid, as well as your thoughts on Jonathan Toews potentially making a return to the NHL. I'll be talking more about that during segment 2 of today's episode, which if you want to skip to that immediately, you can find that time-coded down in the description. Make sure that you're subscribed to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube as well. I am seriously so freaking close to reaching my goal of 2,000 subscribers. So even if you're someone who regularly listens through an audio platform, please make sure to jump on over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button for me. It's 100% free, won't cost you anything, and really does help yours truly out tremendously. All right, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. First and foremost, happy 2025, everyone, as this is the first episode of Locked On Blackhawks here in 2025. The end of 2024 did not go particularly well for our Chicago Blackhawks. They closed out the year with 5 consecutive losses, including 3 lopsided ones in a row, capped off by a real embarrassing drumming to the hands of the St. Louis Blues at Wrigley Field for the Winter Classic. So bad that, according to Spit and Chicklets, not exactly sure if this is 100% true, but not going to say it's not. They're qualified and have had some good insider information in the past. According to Spit and Chicklets, general manager Kyle Davidson went down into the Blackhawks locker room to kind of share his frustrations and disgust over the effort, or maybe the lack of effort, in the game against the Blues. Really, really bad stretch for the Blackhawks to close out 2024. However, that's what makes it so nice to see them enter 2025 and pick up a much-needed 4-2 win over the Montreal Canadiens last night to put an end to their 5-game losing skid. An oddly physical and chippy game between two teams that have yet to play against one another this season and only face off against each other twice every year. I don't know if it was the Colton versus Kirby Dach brother-y-brother matchup, as I'll get to more here in just a second, that led to the game being so chippy, or I don't know exactly what it was, but there was a lot of physicality in this game. We saw an early fight between Pat Maroon and Seikach, Wi-Fi, as some people call him. There were lots of big hits thrown by both sides throughout the course of this game, but just ultimately nice for the Blackhawks to be able to get back in the W column. It was probably the lowest point of the season, was that 3-game losing stretch in which each game was a blowout loss. I know the 5 losses in a row were brutal, but those final 3 games of the losing skid were probably rock bottom for the Blackhawks so far this year. So for them to come out in the first game of 2025 on home ice with the Blackhawks faithful in attendance to reward them with a 4-2 victory, it was very nice to see. But as far as what went right for the Blackhawks, number 1 star of the game undoubtedly is Arvid Soderblom. It was a goalie win for the Blackhawks last night because they were outshot 40-26 in this game. Soderblom was forced to stop 38 of the 40 shots that he faced, including 28 of 29 in the final 40 minutes. The Canadiens came with a super huge surge right out of the gate in the middle frame, but Soderblom was tremendous to stop all 19 shots that he faced in that period. I would say probably 6 to 7 of them were legitimate A-plus stops, and he was just huge down the stretch ultimately to keep the Blackhawks ahead there in the final 2 periods. And with Soderblom continuing to play rather well and just making leaps and bounds compared to when we saw him on the NHL scene these last couple of years, and Peter Mrazek kind of playing a little bit shakily since suffering that groin injury, which, as I've mentioned on the show, is something that's plagued him throughout his career. I do wonder if Arvid Soderblom is going to start to get a little bit more of the lion's share or the 1A type of starts here for the Blackhawks because, as a whole on the season and considering what Peter Mrazek has done in his Blackhawks tenure, he still should be considered the starter. But over the last couple of weeks, if you just look at that sample size all on its own, Arvid Soderblom has been the better netminder. So with the Blackhawks coming off of a win and Soderblom standing on his head, performing at the best of his game, I do feel like he's going to be given the nod once again when the Blackhawks return to action tomorrow afternoon against the New York Rangers at the United Center. I personally would be surprised to see Anders Sorensen go with Peter Mrazek after the type of showing Arvid Soderblom had. Also, what went right for the Blackhawks was Colton Dach certainly made his impact felt in his NHL debut. Dach finally got recalled from the Rockford IceHogs. It felt like he was on the precipice of that for the last couple of weeks, and even dating back to last season, it felt like he was on the verge of his first NHL call-up before, unfortunately, suffering an injury, which has kind of plagued him throughout his young career so far as well. But fortunately, he's been able to stay healthy throughout the course of this season, and even with, Frank Nazar going up to the NHL level, Kevin Korchinski, a lot of rotations happening between the two clubs' lineups, Colton Dach remained a driving force and producer for the Rockford IceHogs, so I thought it was only going to be a matter of time for Dach to get his call up, and I think it was purposely done for him to make his NHL debut against his older brother Kirby and the Montreal Canadiens, which is a little hat tip to the Chicago Blackhawks. I know that had to be a super cool moment for Colton, Kirby, and the entire Dach family. I know not every one of the Dachs was able to be there at the UC in Chicago last night, but I'm sure that's one that they're never going to forget, especially because, well, Colton came out with the W over his big brother, and also he was excellent in his first NHL game. And right from the get-go, you could tell he was trying to make his presence felt. And it just feels like the biggest reason why Colton has been called up this year is because he's finally taken that power forward mold and that style that the Blackhawks have kind of been whispering in his ear to play like these last couple of years. It kind of feels like that's fully gone through his mind, and he's truly understood how to play that style of hockey. Super physical on every shift. You're trying to run through everyone out there. You go to the front of the net, go to the dirty areas. And I also like that Colton was shooting the puck every time he got a puck touch in the offensive zone, it seemed like. Very Ryan Donato-esque, which I think is a page a lot of Blackhawks should be taking out of his playbook. Colton was trying to get the puck on net. He went to the front of the cage, got an opportunity on the Blackhawks power play as well in the net front role, and had a couple of real good opportunities for his first NHL goal. It didn't end up happening last night, but if he continues to play like that, that first NHL tuck is coming sooner rather than later. But love to see Dach with the aggressiveness with and without the puck. He's a big body. He plays like it. Team high, 5 shots on goal last night, tied the team high with 5 hits, also had 3 individual scoring chances, 3 individual high danger chances, and 1 penalty drawn in just 11 minutes of time on ice. No doubt Colton Dach will remain in the Blackhawks lineup when the Hawks take on the Rangers on Sunday, and I really did like his place in the lineup, I should add, by the way. He skated on the Blackhawks' third line with Frank Nazar and Teuvo Teravainen. One thing I didn't like was that with Colton Dach coming in, that meant Lucas Reichel was drawing out. That doesn't really make sense to me whatsoever. But I do like to see Dach going with Nazar. Those two have been playing well together down in Rockford and have some good chemistry on the same line with each other. So I like that. And I like putting Teuvo as the other member of that line, considering he's kind of found his footing here over the last couple of weeks. Expect that to be the same second/third line trio. Not exactly sure what they are for the Blackhawks, but I expect Dach, Nazar, and Teravainen to remain together once again. What I also thought went right for the Blackhawks in this game was they crashed the net with the purpose. Look at all 4 of their goals in this game. They were all really, really similar. Tyler Bertuzzi kicks off the scoring for the Blackhawks on a 5-on-3, drives the net, plays his game, goes to his office, his bread and butter, puts in a nice feed from Teuvo Teravainen for his team-leading 13th goal of the year, and that now gives Bertuzzi 5 goals over his past 6 games. Foligno's first goal was a nice redirect off of a Wyatt Kaiser shot from the point. Foligno going to the dirty areas. Kaiser, by the way, first assist since the 3rd game of the season against the Edmonton Oilers. Pat Maroon's game-winning goal was him driving the net, and Ryan Donato making a nice feed, and then Nick Foligno's last insurance goal was him cleaning up a rebound, going to the dirty areas once again. So just playing with an aggressive mindset, going to the hard areas, the dirty areas, and putting the puck on net as much as possible. I know I sound like a broken record, and I probably have sounded like a broken record saying this on the podcast for the last 3 years, but it's something the Blackhawks just need to do more of, and the proof is in the pudding. All 4 of their goals last night came from right out inside of the opposing goaltender. Just make the simplified play. Better days are to come for this Blackhawks offense as a whole if they do that. And the last thing that went right for the Blackhawks in this game against the Canadiens was the strong third period that they had. I mentioned Arvid Soderblom had to make 19 saves in the second period to keep the Blackhawks ahead going into the final frame. Well, the Blackhawks really flipped the script there in the third period and led 10-3 in scoring chances and 6-1 in high danger chances. And again, after Montreal had come with a good surge in the second period, I think all of us Blackhawks fans expected the same to happen in the third, but the Blackhawks really picked up their play, and it felt like they had that talk in the locker room that, hey, we can't get across this finish line playing like this, guys. We got to be better here in this final frame. We can't lean on our goaltender like we did that last period, and they played much better in the final period, and no surprise that it's what ultimately led to them snapping their five-game losing streak and getting back into the W column to go 1-0 here in 2025. All right, there are my thoughts on the Blackhawks getting a much-needed W on home ice last night over the Montreal Canadiens. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, I'll talk about Jonathan Toews reportedly considering a return to the NHL. But first, I do need to talk to you all real quick about Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had multiple subscriptions that I didn't even realize that I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. And Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million worth of canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. To go and cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money, make sure to go and check out rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNHL today. Again, that's rocketmoney.com/LockedOn. Segment 2, Chicago Blackhawks legend, former 3-time Stanley Cup champion, Conn Smythe Trophy winner, Selke Trophy winner, Jonathan Toews, future Hockey Hall of Famer, has been in the news a lot here over the last couple of days following an exclusive interview that he did with GQ author Matthew Robertson about his healing trips to India, which I have mentioned on the show here and talked about some of the Instagram posts that Toews has had over the last several months, plus the reason why he's been involved in the news so much these last few days, whether he'll ever make a return to the NHL once again. Before I dive into some of Toews' quotes here, the first thing I want to say is I definitely recommend you all go and check out this GQ article that was written about Jonathan Toews. Probably the most in-depth and the most amount of insight that we've gotten about what Jonathan Toews has gone through with chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which has actually been, that was technically what he was diagnosed with following everything that broke out in 2020. But he's actually been dealing with these kind of issues since way back in 2009, which I think is something that no one really knew about. His second year in the NHL, he was dealing with some digestive issues and immune system issues and was having problems sleeping and was having problems with his health. This was something that almost kind of like Marian Hossa prior to him being forced to retire. This was something that behind closed doors, Jonathan Toews had really been dealing with for about a decade, and then just kind of the snowball had rolled and gotten so big, and it finally, hit that breaking point when he mentioned in February of 2020, before, COVID had even really hit the world and everyone knew what it was, that he had been diagnosed with it. And that's actually something that happened to me. I remember I traveled in late February of 2020 with my buddies. I was in college at the time, and we went on a trip to Chicago for the weekend, and I came back. This was literally a week before COVID got announced. And I came back from that trip to Chicago, and I was the sickest, and so was my roommate, the sickest we had ever been in our entire lives. We were like, what the heck just happened to us? 7 or 8 days later, COVID gets announced, and we're like, I think we definitely had that because all of the symptoms matched up. But this was actually, like I said, something that Jonathan Toews had kind of been dealing with for over a decade. But then once COVID and all that stuff happened, it was kind of the bursting of the bubble. But I definitely recommend everyone go and check out this interview. There's so much insight, not only about what Jonathan Toews has been dealing through with CIRS, but also about his really interesting journeys in India to go on this healing process and all the steps and all the medicine and all the healing stuff that he's done, and how, interesting it was for him to be cemented in a completely different culture across the world with no technology. It's really, really intriguing. And for anyone who's watching or listening to this podcast right now, I definitely recommend you go and read that Jonathan Toews GQ article. But obviously, the big reason why people are talking about Jonathan Toews is because he mentioned in that GQ article that he could make a return to hockey. Here's what Jonathan Toews had to say that's kind of got the hockey world going crazy. Quote, I think, going to answer your hockey question, again, I haven't spoken about this to a lot of people, but it's definitely still in there. I've talked to a lot of guys that are done, and a lot of them will say that desire to be on the ice competing and to be in the locker room with the guys never goes away. It's just something that you have to accept when your time comes. So there's that. But at the same time, I think there's a big part of me that really wants to give it my all to get back on the ice and see where it takes me. There's a part of me that really doesn't feel like my career is over yet. And who knows what this next part of the journey looks like as far as getting back on the ice and trying to make a return to the NHL. There's never any guarantees in life, but I'm going to give it my best shot. I'm going to enjoy every step of the way. As hard as it's been at times, I look back now and I'm pretty thankful for it all. So we'll see what happens. Closed quote. And that to me is just the most Jonathan Toews statement, because if you're someone who's followed or listened to the show since, the Jonathan Toews retirement news from a couple of years ago, I've been someone who's felt like Jonathan Toews will always try to play if his body will allow him to. And he just unfortunately got to a point where his body would no longer allow him to play hockey. But following all of these healing journeys and everything that he was open about during this GQ article, seems like he's in a really good spot, both physically and mentally, than he's been in, a handful of years, and truly believes that he'll be able to make this return. And just hearing the quotes, though, that Jonathan Toews saying, like, there's a part of me that still believes I can do it. We know the competitor and the fierce, fiery competitor that Jonathan Toews is. He always wants to prove people wrong. He always wants to do the next big thing. This is not surprising to me whatsoever to hear him have those type of statements. As far as whether I believe he's actually going to come back or not, that's a different case. I do believe he believes it's possible. And with that being the case, I do believe he's going to give it a shot. Whether or not it goes to fruition and it goes well, that's a completely different discussion. But I really do believe Jonathan Toews is going to ramp it back up and try to make a return to hockey. And Frank Saravalli joined the CHSN broadcast before last night's game and mentioned multiple NHL executives have already reached out to Jonathan Toews' agent to see how serious this return is. Toews, according to Saravalli, is already skating. He's already returned to his playing weight, and like I mentioned, is feeling as good, if not better, than he has in the last handful of years. What he's still kind of deciding upon right now is whether he's actually going to try to return for this season, because if that is the case, he would have to be signed before the March 7th trade deadline in order to be eligible for the Stanley Cup playoffs. And we know if he is returning, he's not going to be returning to a team that's not involved in making a run for the Cup. Shocker here, Blackhawks fans. He is not going to be returning to Chicago. Get that thought out of your mind. I hate to break it to you. It's not in the cards. If Jonathan Toews is returning to hockey, it's to be winning, not be part of the worst team in the NHL, where the Blackhawks still are, despite it being 2 years since Jonathan Toews departed them. But three teams that Saravalli mentioned that have already kicked the tires on Jonathan Toews: the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Winnipeg Jets, his hometown team, and the Colorado Avalanche. I don't think there's any surprise there. Those have been teams that have kind of been in discussions with Toews for the last handful of seasons. Toews, he's going to turn 37 in April. Hasn't played, of course, since the end of the 2022-2023 campaign, in which he had 31 points, 16 goals, and 15 goals and 16 assists, in 53 games of action. The season prior was the least productive career of his NHL career. The least productive season of his NHL career, in which he only had 37 points and 71 games of action. But prior to that, Jonathan Toews did show some of the best offensive metrics that he ever produced in his entire career. Just unfortunately, the CIRS really felt like it hit him hard those last couple of years. But if he believes that he's still got something to give, he's going to try to give it. I'm very intrigued to follow along this Jonathan Toews journey. Again, I don't know if it actually goes to fruition the way that he and everyone is hoping it does. It's kind of just, as it's always been with him, a day-to-day type of thing, because you never can truly predict how your body is going to feel the next day. But based on everything we've heard, and it feels like this healing journey doing really remarkable things for him, again, both physically and mentally, yeah, I'd expect Jonathan Toews to gear up and give it his all. Will be really interesting to see if he tries to make a return this season. Man, Jonathan Toews back on the ice by the end of the 2025 campaign. That would be nuts. I think that's probably a little bit far-fetched considering just how much gearing up he'd have to do from being so removed from the game these last couple of years. And right, the game's only getting faster and faster and faster. We'll see what winds up happening though, but from afar, I'm just happy to hear Jonathan Toews is feeling better. He's looking better, super healthy, seems like he's on the right track, and we've seen him being out, being involved, seeing pictures taken of him. It just looks like he's living a much happier life right here, right now than he was for a long, long time there. And whether he returns to hockey or not, I just hope that continues to be the case, because ultimately at the end of the day, what Jonathan Toews deserves is to be happy. And I think a lot of us Blackhawks fans will be there to support him right along with whatever will be the next step of his journey. But will be really interesting to see if that journey takes him back into the NHL. I'll make sure to keep you all up to date on the Jonathan Toews front right here on Locked On Blackhawks. Before I close out today's episode, Blackhawks fans, I still got to get into the latest updates on the 2025 World Junior Championship. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just wanted to say thank you real quick to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast so that you can become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. And you can easily find the link to Locked On Fantasy Hockey down in the description, or search on YouTube and wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Segment 3, the 2025 World Junior Championship is now down to just 4 teams, with the semifinal matchups going down this evening, as Sweden will be facing off with Finland, while the United States, the red, white, and blue baby, will be taking on Czechia. For the second consecutive year, though, I think the biggest narrative that I got to get into here, since it's been, or the biggest storyline, it's not a narrative, it is the truth. The biggest storyline that's gone down in the World Junior, since I haven't talked about it here in a couple of days, is that Canada was knocked out and did not reach the semifinals, the medal rounds, for the second consecutive year to the hands of Czechia, as they fell 4-3 to the Czechs with a costly power play goal in the final minute. They wind up losing 4-3 2 years in a row. Canada doesn't make it into the Final Four in the World Juniors. Feels like it could be a little bit of a changing of the tides historically. But Czechia, what an incredible run it's been for them to make it to the Final Four. They are actually tied for the tournament lead with 29 goals and have been 27.7% on the power play so far for the tournament, led offensively by Captain Edouard Chalet and Jake Stansel of the St. Louis Blues, who is actually leading the team with 8 points so far. Michael Hrabal, the backbone, as I outlined during my preview of the World Juniors, has been outstanding for them in net with a 2.52 goals against and .920 save percentage. Blackhawks prospect Jiri Felcman, it's been nice to get a little bit more exposure on him. Going to be watching him facing off with Oliver Moore in the United States here tonight. Felcman has tallied 2 assists so far through 5 tournament games, while mostly playing in Czechia's top 6. For the United States, it's been a really nice response for them since they fell 4-3 in overtime to Finland in their third game of the World Juniors preliminary matchups. They have bested Canada and Switzerland by a combined score of 11-3 over their last 2 games, and they have now punched their ticket into the Final Four in 8 of the last 10 years. As I mentioned, maybe a little bit of a changing of the guards here at the World Juniors with the United States certainly hanging with Canada, and there will be something said if the United States is able to go back-to-back as gold medalists here. But the top line has been the driving force for the red, white, and blue. Gabe Perreault, James Higgins, why am I forgetting? Ryan Leonard, of course, the BC line. They have been phenomenal. James Higgins, Cole Hudson on the back end as well. Both of them are tied for the team lead in points. This United States roster is just super deep, and defensively, I think they're the best and most experienced of any group. And then Trey Augustine is just such a big difference maker for them in net. As far as Oliver Moore, it's been a lot of fun to watch him in these World Juniors. The pace in which he plays with is just absolutely bananas. I've also been really impressed with his grit and his tenacity along the boards as well. Not surprised that I think 3 of his 4 assists have been primary apples. Does a really good job of using his wheels to draw attention to himself and then find teammates in dangerous areas. Has been playing the wing on the second line for the United States these last couple of games. I had someone mention to me in the comments, like, is that bad that they moved him from center to wing? Honestly, no. I just think it speaks to the depth of the United States and also the versatility of Oliver Moore. He's someone who can kind of do it all out there: power play, penalty kill, offense, defense, center, wing, right? He's a jack of all trades type of guy, and I think Blackhawks fans, if they haven't already, are going to fall in love with this kid. I don't know if he's going to be necessarily the most gifted top 6 offensive-minded guy at the NHL level, but I think he's someone like Brandon Hagel who's going to have his fingertips all over the team's success because of his diversity and how he can make an impact in so many different areas. Hopefully Oliver Moore, though, has saved his best for last year as he's back in the Final Four for the second consecutive year. As far as my prediction, I got Sweden over Finland, by the way. I think Sweden was always that side, that group's top team. I think they're going to take care of business against Finland. Axel Sandin Palika has been the best defenseman probably in all of the tournament, was the best defenseman in the World Juniors last year. They got a really deep group there for Sweden. So I expect them to make it back to the gold medal game. And I expect the United States to take care of business tonight against Czechia. I'm going to go with a 5-1 final for the red, white, and blue here tonight. And that would mean a gold medal rematch between the United States and Sweden. USA got the better of them 6-2 in the gold medal game last year. I'm going to say, like I predicted at the beginning of the World Juniors, the United States, they just got the deepest roster. They got the best blue line. They got the best goaltender combo, I believe. I think that shapes them up in a real good spot to go back-to-back and win the gold medal for a second consecutive year over Sweden. But the semifinal action kicks off here tonight, so make sure to tune in, Blackhawks fans. Jiri Felcman against Oliver Moore. That's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. That way, you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. Until the next episode, everyone, Mailbag Monday. Make sure to drop your Blackhawks-related questions down in the comment section. Until then, enjoy the rest of your weekends. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every